Okay, so my name is Christy Morris again. I work for the National Park Service Air Resources Division. The last session for today is session 3, looking at deposition monitoring to assess and address chemical contamination of the environment. Our first speaker this afternoon is Jana Compton from the EPA, Office of Research and Development from Pacific Ecological Systems Division. And Jana is going to be talking to us today about nitrogen stream responses from the Clean Air Act.
Thank you, Christy. It's great to, I'm really excited about this analysis and sharing it with this group. It's a very, I think, appropriate topic for the group. And I grew up in Oak Ridge next door, and so it's really great to come back and hear about all the local stuff in the Smokies. And I grew up collecting salamanders, and Bull Run steam plant that Susan showed earlier, I could see that from my house. So I was always thinking about, like, what's going on out there? So I'm going to be speaking about the, make sure you can hear me, about the stream responses to the Clean Air Act policies. And I want to really acknowledge my co-authors, in particular, Jiajia Lin, who is the lead author on this work. She's presenting at AGU, and I'm presenting this work here at NADP. And then we have a whole group of folks, largely from EPA, who have been working on various aspects of this research and the team. So as you all know, and as many of you have measured, Clean Air Act policies that regulate the criteria air pollutant concentrations have resulted in a large decline in nitrogen deposition since 1990 and the Clean Air Act Amendment of 1990. So our primary question, we've made progress in cleaning the air. We aren't attaining everywhere, but we've made progress. Our question is, have these declines in N deposition resulted in changes to nitrogen concentrations in rivers and streams across the U.S.? And this is an important question. I always love this slide. Steve Paulson, who is the EPA Office of Research and Development lead of the National Aquatic Resources Survey program, who's actually retiring this year, but he always gives this slide, and EPA administrators in Congress always wanted answers to these kinds of questions. Bill Ruckelshaus, early EPA administrator, said, what do you mean you don't know how many acid lakes there are? So really developing approaches to look broadly across the country and develop population estimates of the streams is a key thing. Good news, Bill Riley, good news. I think the agency does a great job of protecting the nation's public health and quality of the environment, but the bad news is that I can't prove it. And these were really the motivating factors behind setting up the National Aquatic Resources Surveys. So to answer this question of how the Clean Air Act amendments and policies have affected stream nitrogen, we need two kinds of data. So we have the EPA's National Nutrient Inventory that Meredith mentioned, which is an effort to bring together all of the data on nitrogen inputs to the landscape and phosphorus inputs to the landscape as well, because I love phosphorus too. That was my PhD work. And then we also, I just want to acknowledge the importance of the atmospheric deposition data, and we use TDEP for our work here. The other data set is the National Aquatic Resources Surveys, and specifically here I'm going to be talking about the National Rivers and Streams Assessment. So we bring these two data sets together to answer this question. And this is a map of all of the NRSA sites for the first 3 surveys. There's another survey in 2018-2019 that we did not include in this analysis and hope to in the future. But the purple are the 2000 to 2004, the yellow are 2008-2009, and the green are 2013-14 data. And this is basically every 5 years, a large probability-based statistical design so that we can say something about our waters collectively using a weighted approach. And that's as much as I'll say about all the statistics, but it's a great sample, and we focus on weightable streams in our analysis. So it's a great sample of streams across the U.S. It's a one-time sample, and it's in basically in the summer months. The other data set that I mentioned is the National Nutrient Inventory that we published a couple of papers in the last few years on the nitrogen and the phosphorus inventory. And we took for this paper, for this analysis, we took the average of 2002, 2017, and 2012 inventory. And you can see there's some really strong patterns across the landscape. Just really briefly, I could give a whole talk about this, but just really briefly, in farmland, we see fertilizer. Synthetic fertilizer is the largest source of nitrogen to the HUC-8, to the watershed unit, the hydrologic unit. Adjacent to many farmland areas is livestock waste is the largest source in brown there. And then you can see some small but important spots like Long Island or Seattle where human wastewater loads are an important source to the HUC-8. And then all the rest of that light blue is where deposition is the largest source. And so that's what we're going to really focus in on, is looking at those sites, those areas where deposition is the largest source of nitrogen to our NRSA sites. And so if we take all that inventory information, we can create a map of largest source for all of the sites in the NRSA surveys. And this is about 5,000 sites when you take out the repeat samples during a year. And so kind of like the map that I showed you before, the yellow or the orange color is fertilizer, and actually soybean or crop biological N fixation, which is actually the second largest source of nitrogen to the US because we've reduced nitrogen deposition so much. The red, again, the human waste, and the manure is the livestock, or the brown is the livestock waste, and then the red, or the blue is where the deposition is the largest source. And this is the proportion of stream length based on the survey weight. So about half the US streams are dominated by agricultural inputs, and about half have the largest source as deposition. And that deposition is a little fuzzy because some of it could originally come from agriculture, but that's what we're measuring as TDAP as the source there. And so we've done a lot with this data. We published a paper last year in ES&T looking at inputs and stream nitrogen concentrations, and you can see the lower concentrations, there's a good relationship between input amount and stream end concentrations. This is log of both of these measures, and we can explain a little over half just by the inputs, a little over half the variation in stream total nitrogen. And you can see the blue is the deposition-dominated sites, and the green is the fertilizer-dominated sites with some other ones mixed in there. We also did a random forest model that's presented in this paper, and we can predict 70% of the variation in TN using that random forest. And land cover climate, tile drainage, base flow, and also wetlands were important in that analysis. So read that paper and learn more. But for this analysis, we're only going to be looking at sites where deposition was the largest source. And we're going to break them out by ecoregions, combining some ecoregions. We're going to look at the changes in watershed inputs over time, and we're going to look at the changes in stream nitrogen concentrations and forms over time. And so we're crossing out all of those other sources except for deposition, and that's what the map looks like. And this is I think this is the same similar image that Meredith showed earlier. So you can see many of the sites in the plains are not included anymore. We don't have very many sites in the plains, so we're left with a lot of sites in the west and the east and the upper Midwest and the coastal plain areas. And those are kind of the four regions that we break the analysis out into. We look at changes in nitrate, total organic nitrogen, dissolved organic carbon, and total nitrogen concentrations. I'll be talking about those data. Ammonium is so low that it's very hard to really get a good answer when we look at ammonium. So this is what it looks like in a map form, the changes over time, the first survey, the second survey, and the third survey. The redder it is, or the pinker it is, the higher the nitrogen inputs. And so you can see over time there's been a decline in nitrogen deposition, especially in the east. That's pretty clear. We all are aware of that. And this is what it looks like when you do the comparisons by ecoregion. And so for all, the graph on the left is the nitrogen deposition, the graph on the right is the sulfur deposition. And for all the sites, this is the weighted analysis. For all the sites, there's a significant decrease in nitrogen deposition and sulfur deposition. And for most of the regions, there is a significant decline in nitrogen deposition and sulfur deposition, especially for sulfur. Sulfur is very consistently lower between the first survey and the third survey. So what happens with stream chemistry? We don't really see much of a response across the country in stream nitrate levels. Stream nitrate levels only change in one of the comparisons that we looked at in the West. So really, we were very surprised by this result, that we're not seeing a decline in nitrate in the East, even though we're seeing this decline in N deposition. So it's really, we're not seeing much of a change in stream nitrate concentrations that we might have hypothesized at the beginning. The other surprising thing that we found at first was an increase in organic nitrogen and carbon across much of the country. So if you look at all the lengths of the streams across the country, we see an increase in stream TON and an increase in stream dissolved organic carbon. So especially we see, if you look at the whole country, we see a significant increase. And then if you look at especially the southeast coastal area and the eastern area, which is the east plus the upper Midwest, we lump those together. They both have an increase in organic nitrogen and in dissolved organic carbon and total organic nitrogen. So really, this is the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about today, is this widespread increase in organic carbon and nitrogen. There's been a lot of work kind of beginning in the early 2000s about increases in DOC. Many folks have seen this, especially in the northern latitudes. There's been work in Europe, there's been work in the Northeast and Canada on what they have called browning, so the waters are getting browner because there's more organic matter. But we also see this associated with nitrogen as well. There's only 2 other papers that I can find that look at a consistent, from Norway and Finland, that look at a consistent increase in organic nitrogen associated with, in recent years during the last couple of decades. And so it's kind of a novel finding. The drivers behind it, I think, are still we're not exactly sure why this is happening. There's been a number of studies. Earlier studies pointed to climate change, increased temperature, increased productivity. We also have recovery from acidification. So as the soil becomes less acid, the soil has more potential to release DOC. And so the absorption of DOC goes down and you have more DOC available. I probably botched that explanation, and I have a lot of soil chemistry background, but DOC is increasing after recovery from acidification. And then more recently, there's been a number of studies looking at ionic strength. So as we've cleaned up the air, we have reduced ionic strength of the precipitation, I think, and then we have decreased ionic strength of soil solution and streams. And ionic strength, you complex calcium can complex DOC, and it's not as mobile. And so that really, I feel like in reading the literature and preparing this paper, we don't have a real clear answer for why this is happening, but we know it's happening. And if anybody else has other theories or ideas, I would love to hear about them, but those are the ones we've included in the write-up so far. The impacts are a little bit better studied for DOC, for dissolved organic carbon. There's interactions with aquatic productivity. We know that there could be changes in soil carbon, soil organic matter, and soil nitrogen. And then when you have more DOC, you can have high, it poses problems for drinking water treatment, because you can have formation of disinfection byproducts when you have high DOC, and then the chlorine that's used for cleaning the water or treating the water. So the bottom line, unfortunately, my question, did the reductions in nitrogen deposition lead to improvements in stream nitrogen levels? Nitrate levels, the answer is really no. Nitrate levels are generally the same for US streams from 2000 to 2014. We see this increase in organic nitrogen and an increase in organic carbon. That's very important. We don't understand it. We don't really know what the implications are. But these changes are beyond just they could be beyond just the changes in deposition, that we need to think about climate. We need to think about other factors that might change organic carbon and nitrogen mobilization. Is it deacidification? And then these are complex interactions with climate and productivity. And also, I think there's a lot we need to learn about how organic nitrogen affects other impacts of water quality. People have studied organic nitrogen quite a bit, but what are the net impacts on the stream and on the ecosystem that they're leaving from? So I have a few next steps. Meredith presented earlier about the reduced versus oxidized deposition, and I think found some interesting things about organic nitrogen responding differently to ammonium or reduced deposition versus oxidized deposition forms. That's really important. We're also looking at downscaling these inventories to the HUC 12 and expanding them in time to a broader time frame, 1987 to 2017. We also want to look at the 2018-19 National Rivers and Streams Assessment that's just become available as we were working on this analysis, and reanalyze the data to see if the trend continues. We haven't included lakes in this work, and it might be worth looking at the lakes, and also a closer look at what's going on with the drivers of the DOC and the total organic nitrogen. So I think that's all I have. I might have finished a little bit early, probably talked too fast, but I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have at this time.
Jen, I wasn't sure, you went through the slide, but was there a subset of your sites that actually did decrease in nitrate? Or I know your general conclusion was they didn't, but I just wonder, because I know, there's some reports out there of pretty strong declines, like in the Chesapeake watershed.
Yep.
But it seems like there could be a difference north and south of the glaciation, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, we lumped kind of all of the eastern sites together, and we lumped all of the southeast coastal sites together. So there might be some northern Appalachian versus southern Appalachian patterns that are going on, but we did not really have enough data to be enough sites. It seems like a lot of sites, 5,000 stations, but when you start slicing and dicing and pulling out only the deposition, where the deposition is the largest source, we just don't see it when we look at it from this large picture. So I know that there are sites and there are papers out there that look at individual sites, and one of our co-authors was a co-author on that Chesapeake, some of the Chesapeake work, where they've seen a decline in nitrogen. But we're also really focusing in on just the areas where deposition is the largest source. So, agricultural inputs are a lot less important there. And if those are changing too, then there might be some other things going on. So I think, we're just really presenting this and saying, when we look at the national scale, or when we look at these large scales with a lot of samples, this is the pattern that we're seeing. We didn't see a significant decline in nitrate. Maybe things will change as we move forward into 18-19. We've got another 5 years post this analysis, but we're not seeing it when we look at it at this scale. Hey, Linda.
I just have a follow-up question, and you may have said this, but I don't remember. What was the frequency of the measurements of the stream water nitrate that you included in the analysis?
So these are one-time measurements. It's a very different approach than a lot of other agencies use. So it's a huge spatial sampling, and it's only one time in the summer. And then there's a lot. If we've done all these noise to signal ratio calculations for this data, and there's really a very strong spatial signal that, when we look at repeat samples, the spatial signal really holds. So I think when you look at it in that way, it's a good way to get the kind of the big picture understanding. But it's a one-time sample, and we compare the population in 2002 to 2004 to the population in 8-9 to the population in 13-14.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder, because I think about like a site like Hubbard Brook where we, measure things pretty intensively, and we can see that most of the nitrate comes out 15% of the, so like 80% of the nitrate comes out during 15% of the time, so that during the high flow events. And so, and the, with climate change, how the distribution of those events is shifting and stuff, and it just makes me wonder if there are, looking at the base, presumably you're not going during a,
this
a
is
hurricane
base
or something,
flow.
so you're looking at the base flow and then thinking about how the relationship between the event flow and the base flow is shifting over time at the same time as your study. I wonder.
Yeah, and I know the USGS trends analysis, they see for some places, there are declines, but peeling out just where the deposition is the most important source, I think that's an important thing to do for those kinds of analyses too, but yeah.
Great, thank you,
All right.
Jana. Appreciate it. Okay, our next speaker today is Maria Antonio Villegas Botero. She's with Syracuse, the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and she'll be talking to us today about changing parameters in the Adirondacks.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Antonia Villegas Botero. And first, before I start, I want to say thank you to everyone from the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Syracuse University, as well as the Biogeochemistry Department at the SUNY ESF, the College of Environmental Science and Forestry. So today, I'm going to be, sorry, is there a way to move this down? Yes. It's a little high. Sorry about that.
However you want.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Down to?
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through the objectives of the study, some background on acid rain, clean air actions, background on the site we looked into, some methodology, and conclusions, future work, and then answer any questions. So the objectives of the study were to see how long-term monitoring inform the impacts of environmental policy in order to implement meaningful policies and land management regulations. It also will provide clarity to decision-making processes and provide accountability for emissions reduction programs. We also used mass balances to quantify inputs, accumulations, transformations, losses of materials within Adirondack Lake watershed ecosystems, and see how changes in emissions of nitrogen oxides and sulfate translate to changes in water quality of Adirondack streams, lakes, and overall lake watershed ecosystems. So for some background, deposition of sulfur and nitrogen species are extremely important to monitor as key drivers of surface water acidification. Acid rainwater leaches toxic forms of aluminum from soil. It is bad for animals at pH of 5. Most fish eggs won't hatch, and many animals will suffer. And acid rainwater will also deplete nutrient cations from soils, impacting trees and stream health. We looked into acid rainwater in Huntington Forest, which is one of the cradles of acid rain research in North America, and was among one of the first cohort of sites in the NADP network. So, two really important clean air actions that have impacted the Adirondacks have been the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments and the 1991 Canada-United States Air Quality Agreement. The Clean Air Act amendments in 1990 encouraged the use of market-based principles and approaches such as performance-based standards and emission banking and trading, provided a framework from which alternative clean fuels were used to set standards, and promoted the use of clean, low-sulfur coal and natural gas, as well as innovative technologies to clean high sulfur coal through the acid rain program. It also reduced energy waste, created a market for clean fuels derived from grain and natural gas to cut dependency on oil imports. It also promoted energy conservation through an acid rain program that gave utilities flexibility to obtain needed emission reductions. The 1991 Canada-United States Air Quality Agreement addressed transboundary air pollution and initially focused on reducing the levels of acid deposition or acid rain in both of these countries. And in 2000, the agreement was updated to include ground level ozone. A bilateral air quality committee issues a progress report every 2 years, highlighting the progress on the commitments included in the agreement. As of 2017, emissions of sulfur dioxide in Canada and the US have decreased by 69% and 88% respectively from 1990. So the site I looked into, or my team looked into, was Arbutus Lake. It's located in the Huntington Wildlife Forest in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. It's site New York 20 from the National Trends Network. Historically, this watershed has been the focus of over 40 research projects, and Arbutus Lake is part of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Adirondack Lake Assessment Program. The Huntington Wildlife Forest is located near the geographic center of the Adirondack Park. The regional vegetation is transitional between northern hardwood forest to the south and boreal forest to the north. It contains both undisturbed natural communities and managed forest stands. The topography of Huntington Wildlife Forest generally is mountainous, and the elevations range between 1,500 to 2,700 feet. The mean annual precipitation is 41 inches, and mean snowfall is 116 inches. The growing season is also 120 days on average, and the watershed specifically of Arbutus watershed is 3.52 square kilometers. And there have been intensive long-term monitoring since the installation of weirs at the lake outlet and inlet in the 90s. So here are some pictures of the site. At the top is the lake outlet, which is gauged by a V-notch weir that was installed in 1991 by the USGS. The station is now managed by the Biogeochemistry Lab at ESF and was updated with new equipment in March of 2007. The inlet to the top right has been monitored since 1994 using an H-flume at the lake inlet site, and there is also now an 80-foot tower installed for radio communications at the site. The bottom two are pictures of Stream 14 and Stream 15, which drain a subcatchment in the upper Arbutus watershed close to the Ackerman clearing. There are V-notch weirs installed at the site since 2005. Overall, the site has increasing yearly precipitation and an increase in extreme precipitation events, with more than 70% increase in the amount of precipitation falling in very heavy events. But there's also significant year-to-year variation in precipitation levels. So for the methods, we looked at measurements of wet deposition from the NADP National Trends Network at Site New York 20. We also looked at water chemistry and flow data measured using standard methods. Then we went through and calculated mass fluxes using LOTUS, a Fortran program created by the USGS. And for this, we used the AMLE method. And these fluxes were used to calculate a net lake mass balance. Wet deposition of nitrate, ammonium, and total nitrogen as nitrogen and sulfur from the years of 1978 to 2019 were also included in these calculations. So for the wet deposition, you can see the lines on the graphs. These are when the Clean Air Act amendments were implemented, and levels of wet deposition have been going down throughout the years, mainly for nitrate and total nitrogen, also for sulfate, without much change in ammonium levels. And then here's the trends. The stream inlet fluxes were measured daily for sulfate, nitrate, and ammonium for the span of 1999 to 2019. With the exception of ammonia, where we were only able to get data since 2009. Overall, there has been a decrease in sulfate and nitrate in the inlet. However, again, not much observed changes in ammonium. And these are in kilograms per hectare per year. For the net lake mass balance, we calculated them again in kilograms per hectare per year, and this was taking the fluxes of the inlet plus the wet deposition for the watershed and for the lake, and then subtracting out the fluxes of the outlets. And overall, despite having seen the decreases in both wet deposition and the inlet fluxes, there hasn't been very much of an observed change for the net lake mass balance. And because all of these numbers are positive, we can say that Arbutus Lake is a net sink. So for our conclusions, the decreases in wet sulfate and nitrate deposition have reflected overall decreases in air emissions, suggesting that air quality legislation has been successful in the years after implementation, with no changes in ammonium evident. Watersheds are showing long-term decreases in sulfate and nitrate losses, but with significant yearly variation due to variations in both discharge and precipitation. The mass balances indicate that watershed, stream, and lake losses have coincided with decreases in atmospheric deposition, but the significantly lower loss rates have suggested a lack of response. And Arbutus Lake is a net sink for inputs of sulfate and nitrogen and has not exhibited long-term changes in the sink behavior. However, the sink behavior is characterized by considerable year-to-year variability of precipitation and stream flows. For future work, we hope to determine the fluxes of other constituents to gain a better understanding of long-term water composition changes at Huntington Forest. We will look into all of these, and we also hope to calculate mass balances for Arbutus Lake and the entire Archer Creek watershed. If there's any questions.
All right, we have a virtual, we also have one virtual question. So after Greg, we'll go to Umesh. So just hang tight.
So it looked like sulfate was still being retained in the watershed and is leaking out a lot more slowly, perhaps, and there's a lot more variability in the sulfate curve. And so I wonder if you could comment on that. Do you think that there's a mechanism for long-term retention of the sulfate in the watershed?
Yeah, so overall, it's looked like there has been significant retention of not only sulfate, but also other nitrogen species as well. Of course, it is very variable depending on how much precipitation and depending on the inlet flows for that particular year or season, but it does seem to indicate that the lake is a net sink, not just for sulfate, but for a variety of different species, yes.
All right. Umesh, you have a question?
Yeah. Good evening to all. My question is, you have reduction rates of nitrate as per the reduction in air emissions, but can you comment on that whether air emissions are in lines with fossil fuel reduction?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't understand it very well.
If I say that air emissions are reduced as per the fossil fuel reduction consumption?
Yes, there is a significant reduction in air emissions for nitrate and total nitrogen, as well as for sulfate. I don't know if that's what he was asking.
So my question is that nitrate is reflecting reduction in air emission of NO2, and whether that NO2 trend is showing any relationship with the reduction in fossil fuel consumption.
I just can't really understand what he's saying because of the microphone.
Umesh, we may encourage you to write your question into the chat, and we could maybe get back to it in a little bit.
I will write it. I will write it.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Were
Sorry
there
about
any
that.
other questions? Okay. Thank you, Maria.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Virtual next. Okay. So he'll have him share.
Okay.
So you can go ahead.
So our next speaker is joining us from the virtual world. Magdalena Baez is also from Syracuse. And the topic of the talk is concentrations of selenium and other trace metals at Hubbard Brook.
Good afternoon again. My name is Magdalena Baez. I'm a senior studying civil engineering at Syracuse University. And I will be talking about atmospheric concentrations of selenium and other trace metals in Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, located in New Hampshire. Some trace metals are essential to living organisms, but they can be toxic at high exposures. Therefore, it is important to monitor their occurrence to avoid any contamination or toxicity. Since they occur at very low concentrations in the environment, it makes it difficult to measure them in water. Amongst these elements are selenium, cobalt, arsenic, and nickel, which we focus on in this study. Selenium and other trace metals are deposited through precipitation, and therefore we will also be looking at precipitation samples. If you look at the figure, you can see the cycle of selenium and how it is introduced into the atmosphere and deposited into our water sources. As you can see here, the main sources are volcanic activity, as well as anthropogenic sources such as fossil fuel combustion. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Hubbard Brook. Hubbard Brook is an experimental forest located in the White Mountains of New Hampshire and has been operational for over 60 years. So if you see the figure on the left, we have New Hampshire, and in purple is the White Mountain National Forest. Within the White Mountain National Forest is Hubbard Brook. The experimental forest spans over 7,000 acres and is run by the U.S. Forest Service. And although Hubbard Brook is the source of much research, not much research has been done with respect to trace metals, hence the importance of the study. So I considered two questions for the study. Can an effective technique be developed for accurately measuring trace metal concentrations in precipitation samples? And how do selenium and other trace metals vary over time? Precipitation samples were collected from September 2021 to May 2022. They were collected via rain gauges located in watershed 1. The figure on the right shows watersheds 1 through 6 located in the Hubbard Brook Ecological Site. And for this study, we're focusing on watershed 1, rain gauge 1. Since precipitation samples were of low concentration, we decided to concentrate the samples by a factor of 10 on a hot plate. So our procedure included taking 100 milliliters of each sample, preserving it with nitric acid, and placing it on a hot plate until they fully evaporated. Once fully evaporated, 10 milliliters of each sample was reconstituted with a 1% nitric acid solution and then analyzed via inductively coupled mass spectrometry, plasma mass spectrometry, I'm sorry. Using total weekly and bi-monthly precipitation data obtained from the Hubbard Brook website, the volume of total of precipitation was calculated. We then used this to, along with the data obtained from the concentrated samples, to calculate loading. The figure here demonstrates a typical, illustrates a typical rain gauge, and the surface area that we're referring to here is what was used to calculate the volume for the precipitation. The method developed for concentrating samples yielded data that predominantly held percent recoveries within 100 plus or minus 20% for the QCSs. With cobalt, nickel, arsenic, and selenium having average recoveries of 108, 120%, 83%, and 80% respectively. The figure to the left illustrates the agreement between the samples that weren't concentrated and the samples that were concentrated. In this case, we're looking at selenium as an example. The dotted line you see here on the figure is the method detection limit. As you can see, most of the samples were either below or close to the method detection limit. Now, this figure illustrates the variability in the data for concentrated and their unconcentrated counterparts. As you can see, the concentrated samples have less variability, which may be due to the fact that they were higher. They were way above the method detection limit. Keep in mind that the samples that we're looking at here have been back calculated to their corresponding calculations. So we took the output of the concentrated samples, the output from the ICP-MS, and we divided that concentration that we received from the machine, and we divided that by 10 to get these concentrations. So the figures here, as you can see, are the concentrations, the average monthly concentrations for the 4 trace metals plotted alongside the average monthly precipitation sample, the precipitation volume. The data is preliminary. There are a lot of samples that we have not gotten to include in this data that have yet to be tested and concentrated. For the most part, we didn't see much seasonality, with an exception to nickel. As you can see here, the figure on the right shows a dip in the concentrations of nickel in the months of fall and a rise in the months of spring. We did not observe any relation to the trends of precipitation either. But again, this data is preliminary. We are still on the verge of testing more samples. These two figures illustrate the loading, the loading of selenium, arsenic, cobalt, and nickel alongside total weekly precipitation. Again, there was no observed seasonality. What we did observe was that, as you can see here, for selenium and arsenic, they experience high loading in the months of December and low loading in the month of January. As for arsenic and cobalt, they experience higher, or as for nickel, they've experienced a higher loading in spring. The data suggests that the method for concentrating samples was effective in giving more precise readings, but preliminary data does not show any seasonal trends with respect to trace metal concentrations, with an exception to nickel. And loading does not show seasonal trends nor indicate that it is tied to precipitation. Future research will consist of continuing to collect data on precipitation samples and their concentrations over time, collecting data on stream samples in Watershed 1 to eventually calculate total yearly flux in the watershed. I would like to thank NASA for funding my research, and Connor, Mario, and Charles for their mentorship and guidance throughout my research. Any questions?
So that was an interesting analysis you're doing, and measurement of these trace species is pretty difficult. But something that you might be interested, you could compare to, is that there's an improved monitoring site in the vicinity of where you're looking at, and that measures speciated PM2.5 data, including selenium and arsenic. And that might be a nice data set to see if there's if you get correspondence in, say, your seasonal cycles and magnitudes.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Umesh. Can you tell what are the sources of these metals during spring season?
I'm sorry?
You told the spring season concentration is higher. What are the sources, probably sources of these metals during spring?
That I cannot say, but I will definitely do more research into that.
Oh, thank you.
The possible sources.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, Thank you very much, Magdalena, for joining us.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rodolfo Sosa with the University of Mexico, and today he'll be talking to us about Mexico's collaboration with NADP.
Thank you, Christine. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to be here at this presentation. I would like to recognize to my students and colleagues that are working now at Mexico laboratories and office, and the collaboration with the government of Mexico City, and at the international level, the collaboration with NADP, with EPA, and USGS. Thank you very much for your collaboration. All you know that Mexico City is a big megalopolis. It's a nice place to develop an environmental pollution experiments and to know about the relation between air quality and wet atmospheric deposition. It's a very populated city, more than 20 million of inhabitants, more than 5 million of vehicles, and several natural as anthropogenic sources. For different decades, we have a very nice atmospheric sampling and monitoring networks from the government. And this is the example of collaboration about evaluating wet atmospheric deposition. Since 22, the University of Mexico collaborates with the Mexico City government. The Mexico City government take the samples weekly at 16 sampling sites and send the samples to our laboratory at the University of Mexico. During this time, we maintain a collaboration with World Meteorological Organization, participating in the Global Atmospheric Gas Precipitation Program, and with NADP and USGS in the intercomparison laboratory programs. One of the most important findings in these years of collaborations and these years of evaluating wet atmospheric deposition is the pH results. Evaluating the pH results in all the Mexico City metropolitan area, we use the median test. The box plus blue and the box plus yellow represent values below 5.6, and the red box plugs are presented on the north of the city. Most of the region at Mexico City metropolitan area present acid rain. It's important to mention that the dominant winds comes from the north to the south, and most of the industry is located at the north, and in this area is located the landfill. The more acidic values are presented here at the south. As a part of the academical institution, we need to present these results in different journals. And this is an example of the collaboration too with NADP. This is the world nitrogen and sulfur compounds in ambient air and in wet atmospheric deposition at Mexico City metropolitan area. Our group is formed most with environmental engineers, and we need to evaluate the chemical results in order to apply strategies, to reduce atmospheric pollutants. One of the most important findings of this research is that control strategies applied in Mexico City have achieved an important improvement in the sulfur dioxide air quality. This is good, both inside Mexico City, but the problem continue outside Mexico City. Although SO2 Mexico City is an attainment area regarding this pollutant, sulfate continues to be the largest component anion of wet atmospheric depositions. Sulfur continues being the principal problem due to acidification of the rain. We recommend to apply strategies to reduce sulfur dioxide emission in sources located outside and upwind Mexico City. Ammonia stands out as the major agent in the chemical composition of precipitation and in the case of the inorganic nitrogen compounds. We recommend collaborating with NADP, USGS, and EPA to establish a network for urban atmospheric nitrogen chemistry in Mexico. I don't know when, but I hope that maybe in the short or medium time. What happened if we analyze reactive nitrogen? In recent years, you know, it's very important to evaluate this reactive nitrogen in the atmosphere. Oxidizing force, we evaluate for several decades because air quality monitoring station evaluate criteria pollutants. And the people need to know which is the air quality in the area. But we need to evaluate in ambient air the reduced form of nitrogen. This is why we need to evaluate ammonia. And what happened with wet atmospheric deposition? We have been working with the government since the 2003 at the moment, and the results evaluated present a ratio of ammonium nitrate above of 2. That is similar to some urban areas here in the United States. If we analyze the ratio of ammonium nitrate, considering all sampling sites and are ordered due to the altitude, the high altitude is located in this area, the mountains, the forest area, and in downtown is a plain area. The higher ammonium nitrate is in this part and is closer to the landfill. You can observe that this is the landfill area. It's one of the reasons where we obtain the result in ammonium nitrate ratio. Continues with the analysis, we can consider neutralization factors. Ammonium play an important role in the neutralization of sulfide and nitrates. Here you can observe more that point A is the result of the neutralization factor here, and the neutralization is higher in this area closer to the landfill and high activities. As a proposal, we are planning to work with an ammonia network. We are preliminary experiments at this moment. And this is a proposal in order to use the same sampling site that are used in the atmospheric deposition network and increase the evaluation of reactive nitrogen, evaluating ammonia. We use some devices that collect ammonia as a passive way, and then they are analyzed by ion chromatography. The devices use a membrane covered by sodium citrate. This is the idea of the places when we want to do the experiments. This is one area, upwind of the landfill. It's an agricultural site. The other is in downtown. It's in the downtown of Mexico City. We are using the same sites when we are evaluating wet atmospheric deposition, you can observe. And another is on the border of the Mexico City and other state that is called State of Mexico. This is the rough of the Institute for Atmospheric Science. Here we are going to be collecting the ammonia, and at the same time, we collect wet atmospheric deposition weekly and daily. For us, it's very important in order to know the meteorological relay with back trajectory models to use the data that are collected daily. And these are some sites for exploratory experiments located in the student houses. Alex Station and Robert Station here. And the names of the devices are the PK sensors. What happened with the collaboration with the NADP and UCPA? Due to the need to measure reducing foreign reactive nitrogen in ambient air, such as ammonia, we are using passive samplers, but we need to compare with a technical that is validated that's used at this moment. Likewise, a measurement campaign with continuous analyzer is being prepared together with EPA. John Walker, that is here, will be visiting us in Mexico over the next year with a Picarro instrument, and we are going to have the opportunity to compare with the different devices that we are using at the moment. This is the campus of the University of Mexico, and this is the roof of the building of our institution. Another very important subject for collaboration is the international region of the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico is part of the region from United States, Mexico, and Cuba. And in this article, we use the information of one site in Mexico. We have only one site in the Gulf of Mexico working for more than 10 years. And the sites that are located from Texas to Louisiana. And the most important findings were the Gulf of Mexico region has important source of acid rain precursors, obvious. The pH values at Mexican sampling site were similar to United States sites. At the Mexican site, the radio sulfate nitrate was higher than the United States. Acidic deposition has a major contribution for the CO2 emission source because always the radio was higher than 1. It is necessary to extend the sampling atmospheric deposition to another sites, basically in Mexico and maybe in the future in Cuba. What about mercury? This is another opportunity for collaboration. Several years ago, we made an agreement with the industry that is working in mercury emission. According to the Minamata agreement, we need to evaluate mercury in different industry, mining, chloralkali plants, and coal-fired power plants. The first collaboration results in this article, spatial and temporal variability of the atmospheric mercury concentration emitted for a coal-fired power plant in Mexico. Was the PhD study for Dr. Gilberto Fuentes. Coal-fired power plants in Mexico, there are only 3, 2 in the border with the United States at the north, and the other is in the Pacific area. These coal-fired power plants use imported coal, and the dispersion was developed. We are waiting for the next step. Remember that the dispersion model is one step, it's not the last step. We need to evaluate their quality and to install our quality monitoring station for mercury. This is a project. And what we are planning at the moment with NADP. This collaboration, we are going to start working at 2 sites at Mexico City, one in the closer to the industrial area. This site is operated by the government of Mexico City, and the other side will be at the university campus. Both sides are going to receive 2 analyzers from the grant, thanks to David and Wyatt and all the people that is working in this project. And we hope that in the future we analyze mercury at Mexico City, we can to analyze in the international region of the Gulf of Mexico, and why not in another parts of our country, mining areas and national parks would be excellent. This is the view of the sampling site for mercury. This is the site located at the north and operated by the government. And this is the station at the Institute of Atmospheric Science. Both sites are safety, and this site operates air quality monitoring stations with atmospheric deposition samplers and meteorological. we consider this size as a super size, and the information for mercury will be very, very nice to evaluate air quality and the relation with atmospheric deposition. What happened with the mercury is a very nice subject. We can to think globally, regionally, or locally. I can give you some example of effects of mercury, or potential effects of mercury locally. This is the cinnabar, that is mercury sulfide. And why I am talking about this mineral, why it's important for a Mexican site. Open your eyes, not sleep, and please see the film, the pictures. This is the Palenque archaeological site. This is a Mayan archaeological site located in the jungle of Mexico. It's very important for us because during the 90s, the first studies evaluating the effects of wet atmospheric deposition or the effects of acid rain on cultural heritage was developed. During the 90s, Dr. Humberto Bravo started this kind of research with his student, Dr. Rogelio Soto. We detect acid rain in this area. And why is important? Because the monuments are built of limestone. Limestone is calcium carbonate. Very, very nice reaction with the acid rain. And the monument could be destroyed. Okay, this is the importance of Palenque related with wet atmospheric deposition. And here you can observe the aerokinematic samplers that we use in Mexico during the 90s. Biologist Paulo Sanchez adapt these samplers with solar cells and batteries in order to work at the jungle. No facilities for electricity. We use these samplers. These samplers were named Chak. Chak is the god of the rain. I don't know if he's the god of acid rain, but it's the god of the rain. In the Mayan culture, the sampler was named the Chak II. And what happened now? We are talking only about acid rain at this moment. This is the big building of the tomb of Pacal, the king of Palenque. But closer to this building is another building that is the Red Queen. Maybe his wife or his girlfriend, I don't know exactly. But here appears the tomb of the Red Queen. And why is named the Red Queen? Because was decorated by cinnabrium, by mercury sulfide. This is a very important opportunity of collaboration for mercury. I don't know if I want to take the samples there. We need to close the tomb in order to protect the cultural heritage and in order to protect the exposure of the people that is visiting the tomb. Okay, this is a very local example. And what's the next for international collaboration with NADP and other institutions? We need to continue working in atmospheric deposition in urban areas. City Day program is a very, very important program for NADP, and the collaboration with United States, Canada, and Mexico is excellent and it be improved. Mexico City metropolitan area and other urban areas in North America, reactive nitrogen evaluation. You know that United States and Canada are working very hard. We need in Mexico increase this collaboration. We need to include ammonia measurements in ambient air, not only in nitrogen compounds in the oxidized form that evaluate the air quality monitoring stations. We need to include ammonia in this study. The evaluation of sulfur, nitrogen, and now we consider ozone critical loads. This is the task for the future. And why not? Evaluation of the atmospheric mercury in different places. And a very important area. This is the Gulf of Mexico. Here is Florida, Yucatan Peninsula, and Cuba. This is the maritime routes in the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico have a lot of emission sources, offshore oil platforms, and the maritime routes. We can to evaluate, we are thinking in a project considering the automatic identification system of the ships to estimate the emissions of any kind of pollutants. We can include reactive nitrogen compounds, and we can to consider criteria or toxic pollutants and collaborate the different institutions in order to know in a very precise and accurate way the emission in this area in order to complete with the air quality and wet atmospheric deposition sampling sites in the region. Here, it's very important to mention there are a lot of industries on the coast and the industry and the activities that I have already mentioned here. And the collaboration with NADP continues. Most of you have been visiting us in Mexico, giving talks, working, not like a tourist. We are in the field working. Here is John Walker visiting the mangroves, ecological system that can be affected or the critical loss. Here is David Guy talking to the student and to the professor. Here visiting archaeological sites closer to the La Mancha site that is in the Gulf of Mexico. And some of our friends, Christopher Lehmann, in the fortress of San Juan de Ulúa in Veracruz that can be affected by acid rain. This fortress was built during the Spanish conquest by the coral reefs. And coral reefs is calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate could be affected by acid rain. This is an example of collaboration. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any question, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the great talk. So I was interested in, you're embarking on the ammonia measurements, and you had mentioned that the landfill and also like the possible industrial sources up on the northern side of Mexico City. There's been a lot of discussion recently about the role of vehicles as well in terms of the ammonia budget, and so I was wondering if you have any initial expectations of what the largest source of ammonia might be in Mexico City. Thank you.
Yes. We think that the ammonia comes from different sources. At the map, you can see the landfill area, which we need to evaluate in all the city in order to compare. We have some information from another cities that the use of catalytic converters play a very important role because the catalytic converter of three ways can to reduce the nitrogen oxides, most to reduce to nitrogen oxides to nitrogen. With what happened if the converter is not working well, we can obtain ammonia. Another sources is the agricultural area and the use of fertilizers. But I think that is a very important challenge. And this is not only for the people that is working at the laboratory. It's very important to evaluate whether atmospheric deposition and air quality by ammonia and another nitrogen compounds. But it's very important to develop a nice emission inventory. The emission inventory, most of the emissions that we have in Mexico are in an annual basis. We need to improve the time variability, maybe to reduce monthly. I don't know if daily, but we need to improve this. Okay, thank you very much for your question.
I'm not sure if this is necessarily a question to you, but it's sort of a question back to NADP. We have had a long-term collaboration with our neighbors to the north in Canada. We've run inter-comparison stations at the border, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Rodolfo's got an NTN network, at least running, an NTN-like network running in Mexico City. He's talking about starting ammonia, and he's joining the AMNet. I guess I would propose to the general population that we establish some intercomparison sites, maybe at the border, maybe in Mexico City. I would start with NTN, but maybe we start with NTN and AMON at the same time. So.
I agree. That's a good question for NADP. I am happy to increase the collaboration. We are very, very happy to increase the collaboration. I come here every year, and I think that we are walking ahead. Remember, I would like to run. I don't know, walking. Well, why not in the future? Not only to run, we can to fly. Okay, thank you very much for your comments, David. And thank you very much for all.
Yeah, very good. Umesh is virtual next.
Yes. All right, our next speaker in this session is Umesh Chandra Kulshrithra. Umesh is joining us from halfway around the world. It's either late at night or early morning, however you want to look at it, Umesh. He is with Jawaharlal Nehru University, a School of Environmental Science, and he'll be talking to us today about wet deposition in urban, rural, and Himalayan sites.
Thank you very much. Hello to my friend David, Greg, and other deposition colleagues, Christy. I'm glad to share my work and also meet you online after a long time. But this is one reason that we can exchange our ideas and see. I am here going to present some of our ongoing measurements on wet deposition, especially reactive nitrogen, including the sites urban, rural, and Himalayan. These are my co-authors, mostly my students who completed PhD with me, and they are some of them still working in my group. Some are working in other university, for example, on Yeshiva University, Newark, National Taiwan University one, and one working on UC, Berkeley. So this is, I acknowledge the contribution of my students. And the what I'm going to present has been part of our own network, that is PRS Net India, and also part of UKRI GCRF, South Asian Network. I'm PI for this RPO 30 of this project, but overall project director for GCRF is Professor Mark Sutton. Before going into results, I just want to go to some timelines where we started deposition chemistry work in 90s, when the program of composition of atmospheric aerosols and precipitation in India and Nepal was started. I got involved in that, and then subsequently there was program of Indian Ocean Experiment, Indo-X, very famous one, and then there was a program in for regional air pollution in developing country, Rapid Sea. Further, there was another program for this research, composition of Asian deposition, that was under David. And then I got involved in intercomparison of ENET, TOPC for rainwater chemistry. Then we did measurements under atmospheric ground cloud in South Asia. Then there were two campaigns of ISRO GBP, Land Campaign 2 and ICAR. They are also measured rain chemistry and aerosol chemistry. When I joined Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2008, I got involved and I had several students. So I started a program that is deposition research through a student in India that I call network, DRS Net India. So this was supported by students since 2000, and we have several sites and number of observations on this. Then recently we have EPRI, GCRF, South Asian Nitrogen Hub, and that is good. So these are the sites of DRS Net India, and around 30 sites we have this program. Although it's from 2012, but the limitation of this, we have data of 1 year or 2 years, because the research student used to collect for his purpose, and we have now systematically this data. And we have measured different species like gaseous ammonia, NO2, particulate nitrate in rain, and dust fall, because dust fall is very common in India. So that is also covered. And these sites we can classify into different inertia, rural, semi-urban, urban. And some of them you can see here mostly. It's started from Himalaya, Indo-Gangetic Plain or near Delhi capital, then some are in eastern side. Another network I'm dealing with that is GCRF network, where JNU is coordinating the South Asian sites, Nepal, and there are two sites, Bhutan one site, Bangladesh two sites, Sri Lanka one site. There is another few more sites in India. And then we have Maldives. There is a meeting in this month end over nitrogen in Maldives regarding this project. Then under this network, we collected all samples using manual sampling assembly using bottle and funnel, because automatic samplers are so costly. In fact, I tried one sampler to procure from Ancon, but that did not work. There was some technical problem. But this network we are handling with manual wet collectors. Mostly we collected event-based samples, and these samples were stored in bottle and lower temperature. Then any particulate matter was filtered with nylon syringe filter. And chemical analysis we carried out using hand chromatograph and using certified reference materials. This is some features of manual rain collector, and these type of collector and mounting of this collector like this we have done now. In the GCRF we are using this type of. Both are very similar, diameter of same. This is our IC. Now this slide shows different sites and their nature and the data what we have collected for different species during this. So these are around 30 sites on the DRS net, covering all urban, rural, semi-urban sites. And I have here plotted average values of ammonium nitrate, and this slide basically indicates that since 2013 to 2017, in a gap of 4 years, there was increase at one site, that is our university JNU site, that ammonium was 98 to 160 microequivalent per liter, and that nitrate 48 to 61. So it indicates that both these parameters are increasing, and ammonium is higher than nitrate quite obvious, and that because our fertilizer application is increasing, and this urea especially we have more, but during 17 onward due to humidity. So after that we don't know the data. We have to see what 13 onward the increasing, and also the number of industry, number of vehicle, that is also going on increasing in the capital region. In general, country as a whole, number of these emission sources are increasing. And if you look at this slide, it shows that we have urban, rural, and Himalayan side. Although the overall acquisition is less, but ammonium is very high on the side, and also nitrate. And Himalayan sites are really worry for India because it's a sensitive ecosystem. So one thing here you see we have high non-sea salt content. Non-sea salt sulfate is high, but that is not contributing towards lowering the acidity of the rain, because that we have done a lot of work in this line, and we found that the dust, which is rich in calcium carbonate, effectively remove sulfur dioxide and then making calcium sulfate rather than providing this product of sulfuric acid, which contribute to free acidity. So this is the difference in India, but in general, ammonium and nitrate are in, and they have impact like any other geographic location. Then I have plotted here these are contours for ammonium, and you look at this the center here, national capital region, which having, and hereby there is a state, Haryana agricultural state. So all these sites mostly they are concentrated in this area, and here is epicenter of ammonium. Now our previous studies, even 2 decades back, also this was the case, and this is contours for nitrate, and you see here other than there is different if you compare to ammonium, the patterns are different. Here you see there are 2 pockets, this side central, north central India, and other one is towards eastern side. So it is showing that local sources as well as this eastern side comes from pollution monsoon season. And this is a slide showing major ions at industrial and urban sites. And clearly you can see that ammonium and calcium are the major ions playing role in the chemistry, and also then third one is sulfate. Other ions are different. But another point is that industrial and urban sites, they have more this deposition of ammonium, and industry side have more deposition. And then this sulfate is highest site. Under QA/QC exercise, we plotted ion valence. So here you can see ion valence is more than cation upon anion. It says the anion deficiency that have been a typical feature of Indian rain because normally bicarbonate is not analyzed, so that gives a gap in this balance. Most of these sites, this is, and due to this high particulate matter, the air quality is also poor. That is another thing. Then, if you, one example I am putting here on site, how this percent contribution of different ions is, you see, and calcium and others, then other ions are less. If you look at this, these are the Himalayan site and we have thin sites. One student, Anshu Sharma, she did work on this, and you look at this. Here, the case is we have included bicarbonate. So this corroborates that bicarbonate is very dominant, and if you do not analyze, then probably iron valence exercise may not reflect correctly. Then this slide shows long range transport over Himalayan region, which here must trajectories, so the routes and communities, Africa, North Atlantic Ocean, Northeast. So this is long range transport means so local as well as transport sources. And further investigations are required of this sensitive ecosystem in region, and there are so many other aspects related to security. We will need to investigate further. In another study, we quantified these trajectories coming from North Atlantic, Africa, Middle East, Europe, and Indian western side and far. The percent contribution of different trajectories, we found that this kind of. So if you for ammonium nitrate, and then you see mostly this is coming from Africa and outside. So this is some kind of, it gives idea of long range transport, and also it besides that there is a need for long range transport and transport stages. In order to summarize, I can say that there's an increased reactive nitrogen deposition during past decade, and Indo-Gangetic plain has the highest deposition of ammonium. And Himalayan region is influenced by long range transport of pollution. If we say that rural site versus industrial site, what is the situation? Then ammonium is more deposited. Rural sites, one rural site was having even equivalent to industrial site deposition, that kind of thing we have to investigate. Then rainwater has a higher ammonium than nitrate nitrogen, and ammonium and calcium are two major ions that we have to further see in the importance in utilization. It is highly required, need of the hour to report QAQC in all data sets, because I did one exercise long back, and most of these studies they do not report this WMO wanted and so finally, I can say that there is need to carry out long-term measurements in South Asia in order to find out the effect of increasing oxides of hydrogen and sulfur on the acidity of rain and relationship with the trends of fossil fuel emissions in the region, because this type of thing can be very good for policy makers. I was also part of this policy team that made by Supreme Court of India and the Environmental Pollution Control Authority, and we did that time good job. 18 to 20 air pollution was reduced by using graded response action. So further, that kind of exercises and regulations framework within Southeast Asia are needed. With this, I thank you very much. If any question, I will be happy to answer.
UMesh, this is David Gay. Thank you for the presentation. Enjoyed it. I may have missed this. How long has your current network been running? And you're doing all the analysis, correct?
Can you repeat?
I'll slow down. I tend to talk too quickly. So your current network, how long has it been running? And are you doing the analysis in your laboratory?
Yeah, this network I started around 2012, and all including sample collection, analysis, data analysis, interpretation, that is done by my team. So that way I am many students, but less collaborators that way. I have a full facility for chemical analysis.
Our next talk is by Ankita Katak. She is also from New Delhi, India, in the same university, and she'll be talking to us today about wet deposition of heavy metals and reactive nitrogen during the monsoon in Delhi.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Greetings from New Delhi, India. And my name is Ankita Katak. I am one of Professor Umesh Kulshrestha's students. And currently we are working on the UKRI GCRF South Asian Nitrogen Hub project. And one of the objectives of the project is to assess the wet deposition of heavy metals and reactive nitrogen compounds at different sites in South Asia. And in this talk, I will be presenting few of the results that we have observed during monsoon season in Delhi. So the title of my today's talk is Wet Deposition of Non-Essential Heavy Metals and Reactive Nitrogen During Monsoon Season in Delhi, India. So as we know that there are major sources of heavy metals in a developing nations, they can be natural as well as they can be anthropogenic sources, which can come from different sectors such as agricultural sector, industrial, domestic, or there can be other miscellaneous sources such as landfills, traffic emissions, incinerations. So all these sources actually lead to the emission of heavy metals in the atmosphere, which eventually get deposited, and they lead to ecological risks, and they are ultimately a hazard to human health. So heavy metals are hazardous pollutants emitted in the atmosphere that get deposited in various environmental matrices. Usually, rainwater is very important in scavenging these trace metals, and about 80% of trace metals, they get deposited via wet deposition mode. And ultimately, the heavy metals may enter the human body, and they are of specific concern because of their persistent non-biodegradable nature. So, here I am only focusing on the non-essential heavy metals, which are not required by living organisms for any of their biological activities. And their occurrence above a threshold level may cause toxicity in the ecosystem. Anthropogenic sources for these non-essential heavy metals include industrial processes, fossil fuel combustion, batteries, biomass burning, solid waste, waste dumping, etc. Similarly, the reactive nitrogen compounds, the atmospheric nitrogen compounds act as a catalyst in the photochemistry of the troposphere, and they affect the Earth's radiation budget and may lead to eutrophication or acidification in ecosystems. Similarly, the sources for inorganic nitrogen ions and their precursors are effectively contributed by vehicular emissions, fertilizer applications, livestock, fossil fuel burning, etc. So there can be several pathways of deposition for atmospheric particles. They may get deposited in the ecosystem through dry deposition or wet deposition. So for now, we'll be focusing only on the wet deposition via rainfall. So this slide basically shows the gist of the study that we have performed. As we know that Delhi usually has very bad air quality, and the air pollution levels are very, very high. So we decided to focus on the non-essential heavy metals, that is cadmium, lead, and mercury, along with the nitrogen compounds, that is ammonium and nitrate, their long-range transport in the atmosphere, and how they were getting deposited, their deposition fluxes via rain in Delhi. So the rainfall samples were collected at JNU, that is our university site in Delhi, during July 2021 to September 2021. So the location of the site is located towards south of Delhi, and the samples were collected using the bottle and funnel assembly, as shown by Professor in the earlier presentation. The samples were digested using 1 ml 5% nitric acid, and they were preserved for 4 degrees Celsius for heavy metal analysis. And we analyzed the samples using ICP-OES, and ammonium and nitrate were analyzed by ion chromatography, whereas the mercury estimation was done by anodic stripping voltammetry. So our average concentrations were seen for nitrate and ammonium, as well as for cadmium, lead, and mercury. Then for non-essential heavy metals, mercury showed least concentrations, followed by cadmium and lead, whereas for inorganic nitrogen species, the nitrate concentrations in Delhi were higher than ammonium concentrations during monsoon period. And the table shows a range of the values that we got for each parameter. Though we measured the concentrations, but for episodic events, it's not very accurate to simply present the arithmetic means without taking account of the volume for the rain. So as during rainfall episodes, the associated ions may only be deposited in large amounts on a small number of occasions. So the normal mean values can be highly skewed. Therefore, we must take into account volume weighted mean concentrations. And the table here presents a comparison of various volume weighted mean concentrations. In Delhi, the volume weighted means were relatively very high as compared to most of the other sites in the world. The only place to have higher values than Delhi was somewhere in Kazakhstan, as this table shows. One of the sites, Alaska in USA, was monitored by NADP for mercury. And it was the site in US probably that had the lowest mercury concentrations. The range was about 1.8 to 6.1 nanograms per liter. Using the volume weighted means and the rainfall depth, we basically calculated the deposition fluxes. So the contribution of ammonium was higher than nitrate to the total inorganic reactive nitrogen wet deposition flux. Even though the concentrations of the average concentrations of nitrate were higher than ammonium, as shown in the previous slide, but for the wet deposition flux, clearly ammonium had the highest wet deposition flux. And the wet deposition fluxes for non-essential heavy metals were in the order of mercury was less than cadmium and cadmium was less than lead. So lead had the highest wet deposition flux during monsoon. Next, we also calculated the enrichment factors for the non-essential heavy metals. Here, aluminium was used as the reference metal, and the ratio of concentration of metal and aluminium in the sample and the upper continental crust were used to calculate the enrichment factors. So enrichment factors basically gives the insight about the increase in metal concentration from anthropogenic sources. So it was observed that cadmium showed the highest enrichment factor, followed by mercury and then lead. So we had analyzed like multiple heavy metals, including iron, chromium, nickel, etc. But we realized that the deposition and the enrichment factor for non-essential heavy metals were the highest among all the analyzed trace metals. So we also did the back trajectory analysis for our compounds, and we realized that more than 70% of the contributions, as you can see, there are 3 clusters here, and for cluster 2, which is about 33%, and cluster 3, which is about 38%. So about 70% of the contributions were associated with these clusters, originating from the southern side of India, and they were passing over the IGP region, which is the Indo-Gangetic Plains. And this is a very densely populated, industrially and agriculturally very active region in India. And we realized that during the monsoon months, most of the pollutants, in this case, the figures showing nitrate and ammonium, they were coming from the IGP region. Similarly, for heavy metals also, it was nearly the same, except that apart from cluster 2 and 3, one of the clusters which was coming from the southwest direction, that is from Arabian Sea in Gujarat, also showed limited contributions at the receptor site in Delhi. So to summarize the results, the study showed that the inorganic reactive nitrogen species in non-essential heavy metals are indeed deposited in significant amounts by the wet removal process. The average concentrations of the analyzed compounds followed the order of nitrate greater than ammonium, followed by lead, cadmium, and mercury, whereas the wet deposition fluxes followed the order of ammonium, followed by nitrate, lead, cadmium, and then mercury. A worldwide comparison of VWM indicated that the concentrations of heavy metal, non-essential heavy metals in rain were much higher in Delhi than most parts of the world. And the enrichment factor shows that the non-essential heavy metals were more enriched by anthropogenic sources as compared to other trace metals at the study site. Then the back trajectory analysis for July and September showed that 70% of the contributions were from the wind trajectories that were passing over the densely populated northern region of Indo-Gangetic Plain. And with growing industrialization, there is a need to carry out more studies on metal scavenging and deposition on different surfaces in the region. So that is all from my side. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I had a question for the clusters. Was that just grouping of wind direction, or did that involve concentrations that you saw?
Yes, so it did involve concentrations because they were actually concentration weighted trajectories. So we clubbed the concentrations along with the wind directions, and the grids here basically reflect the concentration, whereas the these lines are showing the clubbing of the wind trajectories, the three major trajectories or the clusters that we got.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was really nice to be here.